It's May 2020, exactly a year to the day since Foodora couriers first launched their union drive. A lot has happened since then.
Voting is currently underway for them to join the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, which has...
A groundbreaking decision from Ontario's Labour Board could have...
Begin tonight with new warnings about the coronavirus, known as COVID-19.
It's a warm, bright day in Toronto, one of the first hints of spring since COVID-19 stay-at-home orders were issued. The street outside Foodora's headquarters is blocked off, and couriers are standing 6 feet apart in protest.
In this 1 year since May 1st, 2019, we've made so many gains.
Ivan Ostos is at the mic.
We changed the law. We made it so that we were recognized for what we are. We created a community out of nothing.
After a year of meetings, hearings, and organizing, couriers were granted the right to form a union. They were hoping to change the gig economy.
So a surprising development in the food delivery industry, Richard.
But their hopes were stalled.
Now, today.
Today's rally isn't just about fighting for job protections.
It's Foodora, one of the more popular food and alcohol delivery apps that out of the blue this afternoon said, hey, we're pulling out of Canada.
Foodora's announcement came as a shock. And at today's rally, there's a sense of anger, urgency, and sadness.
And I'm not going to pretend that this didn't hurt.
To Ivan, the timing stings.
There's all this stress from this pandemic that's going on, and stress from thinking about what other people are going through, and, you know, there's never a good time for this to happen, right? There's never a good time. In fact, couldn't have probably happened at a worse time.
I'm Sara Mojtehedzadeh. This is Hustled, a podcast where we explore what it means when your boss is an app. For the past year, I've been following a scrappy group of Toronto couriers as they take on a food delivery giant, a modern-day David and Goliath story. Couriers have just been dealt a major blow in their battle to become the first app-based workforce in the country to unionize. And it's raising questions about what happens when gig workers rock the boat.
Hello? Hi. Hey, I just got the email about Foodora. Yeah, me too.
When the news of Foodora's closure comes, I immediately call union organizer Lisa Schofield.
We're just trying to figure it out in this moment, but...
Thanks to my brief stint as a courier, I still get the periodic updates Foodora sends to its pool of riders and drivers. Over the past couple of months, they've mostly been about COVID-19. One recent email thanked couriers for bringing, quote, a little bit of normal back into people's lives, and noted that customer demand had steadily increased. That's why I was surprised by Foodora's next message. In the subject line, important update. It announces that Foodora has not been able to grow in a highly competitive and saturated Canadian market. The company will be leaving the country in just 2 weeks.
Whenever you have a sec, if you're able to chat or just KPW has a statement that you could send, I'll do a quick
For sure. Yeah.
story.
I'll get that to you as soon as I can.
Okay, cool.
So
Thanks.
fucked up.
My hands were shaking, and
Courier Jennifer Scott first thought the email might be a scam.
Right, and so like tons of confusion across the city. When a lot of folks reached out to ask for clarification, like what does this mean? Because it's so frightening to get that email, right?
What was, like when you were speaking to your fellow couriers, what were some of the feelings and concerns and anxieties?
I think a heartbreak about the loss. We talked about how this is a kind of, it's a thing that we have to grieve. It's a kind of grief, right? And then we have these more really, really intense and frightening fears. What happens if we don't have another job? How are we going to get another job right now during a pandemic?
For couriers who turned up to protest, Foodora's departure threw basic needs into immediate jeopardy.
How are we going to pay bills? To be talking about that today on May 1st, when rent is due for the second time during a pandemic and tons of Torontonians and Canadians have not been able to pay it, is offensive. It's the best word I can think of.
Foodora's closure also raised a lot of questions. Questions about timing, questions about motivation, and questions about what the app company's sudden exit from Canada says about the gig economy as a whole.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you are safe and healthy.
The day after Foodora announced its departure from Canada, its Berlin-based parent company Delivery Hero released its first quarter results. CEO Nicholas Osberg emphasized the company's growth in spite of the pandemic.
Despite some initial negative impact from COVID-19, we grew orders with 92%.
Globally, Delivery Hero's revenue and total orders had almost doubled year over year. During the pandemic, orders around the world remained stable.
Now we're back on track again, or even ahead of pre-COVID levels.
In the Americas, they had actually increased. But 2 days after announcing its exit from Canada, Foodora started insolvency proceedings. According to initial documents, the company was $4.7 million in debt. Foodora declined all my interview requests for this podcast. But in a statement, the company said it was not leaving because of the ongoing legal dispute with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. Rather, its business strategies had not, quote, generated the desired results over time.
Hi, this is Putila Carpoche, MPP for Parkdale Hyde Park.
Not everyone was convinced. From politicians,
Foodora leaving Canada only shows that they knew all along you are employees, not independent contractors. Even as their profits are up, they'd rather pack up their bags and leave than respect the law. And to do so in a time of crisis shows their true colors.
To couriers.
To leave a group of people who only want to work their goddamn asses off and bring the people the things they need, to leave them in the middle of the largest global pandemic in living history is cowardly beyond measure.
A few weeks later, Foodora filed new documents to Canada's bankruptcy office. These ones said the company was in fact $52 million in debt. Almost all of that money was owed to its parent company, Delivery Hero. And as it turns out, this wasn't the first time the company's story unfolded like this.
Today, one of those riders, Josh, got his verdict in an unfair dismissal case against the delivery giant.
Josh Kluger started working as a Foodora courier in Melbourne, Australia, when he was a university student.
I would just ride around Melbourne and I saw some people riding around and they looked like they were working. That seemed like a great job.
Just like in Toronto, Foodora moved into Australia in 2015 after acquiring a local delivery startup.
I remember reading the contract as well, and it was a little bit scary with like the things that was written there, like how loose my actual rights were within the company, like how easily they could get rid of me for anything they wanted. The pay was okay at the time. It worked out to being about 14 Australian dollars an hour and 5 per delivery.
It seemed like a good arrangement at first. In addition to being a courier, Josh was hired by Foodora Australia to help manage other couriers.
After 6 months, I had sort of elevated myself to being a leader of the riders. There was a few of us that were lead riders. And the management came to us and said, hey guys, we're going to drop the pay scheme, $1, to $12 an hour. But then that soon changed a couple months in to $9, and then more months later it was $8. Then I quit at that point because it was getting ridiculous. And then just after I quit, they dropped it to $7. But I was still riding, but I just quit as being the manager because I couldn't hire people to a job which I felt was just going to shit.
Josh also decided to speak to the media about what he saw as unfair pay cuts. Shortly afterwards, he was fired.
So at the beginning of 2018, February 2018 was when they terminated my contract.
Foodora Australia claimed Josh was fired because he refused to hand over control of an informal online chat group for couriers, a group the company asked him to set up and administer. So Josh contacted the Australian Transit Workers Union.
The union looked at my case and they're like, this is a really good case to go to the Ombudsman for Fair Work. At that time, to go to the Fair Work Ombudsman and to prove that you were unfairly dismissed, you have to establish that you're an employee, because contractors can be treated like that, but employees can't. So when I explained my working situation to the Ombudsman, the judge found that, I was an employee.
Even though Josh did have flexibility as a courier, the Ombudsman found that Foodora still maintained, quote, considerable capacity to control his working conditions.
They say it's a flexible job, but if you were to treat it as flexible as they advertise, they would fire you. They would not let you work for them, because you have to do work in the areas that they want you to work in and at the times that they want you to work, because they have customers that want to order food and they want those customers to get their food as fast as possible. So they keep using the app.
Foodora was ordered to pay Josh 29,000 Australian dollars. He never received the full amount.
I think beginning of August, they left the country. And then a little bit after that, they lost the case.
Foodora said it was leaving Australia to focus on, quote, other markets. A few weeks after Foodora Australia announced its closure, it initiated bankruptcy proceedings. Its biggest creditor, its parent company, Delivery Hero.
It is interesting that the initial list was, 5 million, and the next list is 50 million.
Doug Hoyes is a Toronto-based bankruptcy expert who runs one of the country's largest insolvency firms.
Based on reading the proposal itself, which is kind of interesting in that the proposal has a bit of history with it, which you don't usually see.
According to bankruptcy proposal documents, Foodora Canada had about $1.5 million in assets at the time of its closure. Most of that was used to pay outstanding tax bills.
The creditors will not be getting paid in full. They probably won't be getting paid anywhere near in full.
Unlike in Australia, Canadian couriers weren't listed as creditors. They did receive their final paychecks. Foodora also paid its in-house employees before shutting down its Toronto headquarters. That left the company $170,000, not enough to pay out hundreds of restaurants and retailers still owed money. The bankruptcy proposal revealed something else. It showed that Delivery Hero had been bankrolling Foodora Canada since it began operating in 2015. For Doug, that raises more questions.
Obviously, you and I have not gone through all of the money that has flowed through over the last 5 years, but they are saying that they have loaned over $45 million to Foodora. That's how they funded them. And we have to take them at their word that that's actually legit and correct and everything. That being the case, I guess that means on a cash basis, Foodora must have lost $45 million over the last 5 years. It seems like a big number. That seems like a lot of money to me in 5 years. If I had lost many millions of dollars over the first year or 2 or 3, I don't know if I would have been continuing to fund it in years 4 and 5 unless I thought that I was actually figuring it out.
On the surface, Foodora seemed to be doing well in the crowded delivery app scene. Last year, the company beat out competitors to win an exclusive agreement with Ontario's Liquor Control Board to deliver alcohol in the province. Then, last fall, Foodora launched its Shops feature, which expanded its delivery options to include a range of retailers, from supplements to vaping supplies to pet food.
When Foodora approached us in November 2019 and told us they were going to be launching a vertical platform of businesses such as ours, we were really excited. It was just exactly what we had been looking for.
Karen Schiavone owns Barkside Bistro, a raw dog food retailer in Toronto's East End. Her store was one of the first to sign up with Foodora's expanded platform.
It satisfied what we thought was an option for customers that was missing and lacking from our offering before, wherein they could have on-demand delivery in a time frame that suited their schedules, not, our conventional delivery, which is 1 or 2 days a week with no guaranteed delivery time.
Karen said the service was a lot more convenient for customers, and working with Foodora boosted her business.
The first order was a little nerve-wracking, but the device worked beautifully It worked really well, and it was a really good experience for us.
But less than 6 months after Barkside Bistro started using the app, Foodora closed down. Karen was left to start managing her deliveries again, this time in the middle of a pandemic.
But I don't actually know if there's anybody doing what Foodora did for a business like mine out there at this time. But I was really sad to see them go.
She said her interactions with Foodora drivers were always positive.
I worry about those drivers, as we all worry about what's coming for us financially and after we come out of this situation.
Now, Karen is listed as a creditor. She's one of hundreds of business owners who might not recoup all the money they're owed. Companies go bankrupt all the time, but usually there's a long process to identify and sell off assets. I asked bankruptcy expert Doug Hoyes how Foodora's circumstances compare.
I don't know what assets a service company like this would have. I mean, they don't make food, so they don't have kitchen equipment or anything like that. My understanding is everybody's a subcontractor, right? So if I'm delivering, I have my own car, my own bicycle, I go to the restaurant, I pick up the food, I take it to the individual customer. So Foodora is not providing cars or really any other equipment. Maybe they have some delivery bags or something like that, but there isn't a whole lot there. So I would assume that the only assets they have would be things like maybe there's computers somewhere to run the back end. And then I guess they have their name, their goodwill.
And when you say their name or their goodwill, I mean, how does that translate into being able to pay out actual money to creditors?
If somebody's willing to buy them. The key question is, what exactly are they buying? With a traditional company, yeah, I know what I'm buying. I'm buying that building and the real estate and those machines and tangible things. And so there's less risk in buying actual hard assets because if it doesn't work out, well, I can always get in an auctioneer and sell the assets and get something for it. In this particular case, yeah, you are buying air. That's really what you're buying. You're buying air.
But just 3 days after Foodora ceased operations, that's exactly what happened. The offer came from a company called FaceDrive. That sale is now awaiting court approval. It could mean more money for creditors.
FaceDrive is a new all-Canadian rideshare platform.
It started operating in smaller Ontario cities like Hamilton and Guelph.
So we're scheduling a pickup, and we're going to be picked up at 100 King Street West.
In a press release, FaceDrive says it's buying certain assets from Foodora, but the company didn't respond to any of my follow-up questions. FaceDrive markets itself as the socially conscious alternative in the app world. In this YouTube video from a year ago, then COO Cheryl Lewis describes the company's vision.
We're unique in the sense that we're keen on the environment, and where we set ourselves apart from other rideshare platforms is we take a portion of our profits. We set aside 2 cents for every kilometer that our riders are in our cars, and we put that towards planting trees back in the community.
FaceDrive says a portion of each fare is used to offset vehicle emissions. The company also says it's focused on new immigrants to Canada.
For us, it's very important to give back.
And unlike its competitors, it offers benefits like profit sharing. But regardless of these alleged differences from the competition, one thing appears to be the same. At least one driver I spoke to who's worked through FaceDrive was hired as an independent contractor.
It's like first is tragedy, second is farce.
Ryan White is the lawyer representing Foodora couriers and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. He says between FaceDrive and the bankruptcy proceedings,
it's like Groundhog Day. You've got someone saying, look, you're not employees.
Foodora gave couriers 2 weeks termination notice and paid them for the orders they delivered up until the company shut down. But once again, their employment status is coming into play.
I think the fundamental issue is this is where you see the corrosive element of misclassification. For ages, Ontario minimum standard legislation has recognized that there is a particular need to help workers when there's mass terminations, so mass layoffs, restructurings, closures.
those protections don't apply to independent contractors.
Actually undercuts all of these social safety nets. And one of those social safety nets is mass termination provisions, right?
These include greater protections around termination notice and pay. It would also provide access to the Wage Earners Protection Program, a federal initiative to help workers whose employer declares bankruptcy. To get these entitlements, Foodora couriers will now have to make their case again.
There's all these different kind of social safety nets that are meant to apply, but they only apply to people that we agree are employees. And it means that every step of the way, whether it be unionization or whether it be just making use of social safety nets, these couriers have to fight and fight and fight.
The Canadian Union of Postal Workers has filed a new complaint at the Labour Board. It alleges that Foodora's closure constitutes union busting.
In a case like this where there's a closure, what the union is then looking for is to, to validate its claim, to say, look, that in fact what has happened is inappropriate. And that hopefully sends a message to future campaigns that they will be protected. But then the big thing is to try and get compensation both for the union and individual couriers.
And amid all this, the couriers press forward with their union drive. They wanted to unseal the results of last year's vote, which was delayed by legal proceedings.
It would be a shame to walk away from the fights, though, because it would be nice to try and get the board to make some case law now about, for kind of future platform employers, how to address these things.
Even if Foodora no longer exists in Canada, Ryan says the vote is still hugely important.
There are a lot of people who, have a lot invested in the validation that would come with being recognized and being recognized as employees. The kind of subjective benefits and the psychological benefits and the validation for couriers.
I asked Foodora courier Chris Williams how he was feeling.
Enraged and full of energy. They obviously depended always on money from Berlin, and there was a decision up the ladder that they did not want to foot the bill anymore, and that was a moral decision in a way too, right?
What are you going to do now? Are you going to shift to another app, or what's...
Probably Uber, yeah. I'm going to have to take a couple months and like on a personal level, I'll have to reflect on what's happened and think on the future. It's hard to predict my own future right now.
There's a lot to process. I mean, it's been a years-long thing and a lot of emotional energy, I would imagine, from all of you.
And I've been really involved in this for a year and a half, and I haven't taken much of a break at any point, so I'm going to need to basically spend some time processing this.
What do you think it says about their business model and how sustainable it is in the long term?
The business model depended partly on novelty. On first impression, it seems quite a liberating business model. For the workers, it takes not very long at all to realize how full of shit it is. But for the public to realize how sort of unsustainable the business model is takes a few years. By the time it does, obviously, the companies are going to be held to account. And something like this is going to happen. They either change the business model, adapt it along sustainable lines, or they leave. And this will happen to all the other companies as well. But I think that it's important to remember that we are part of a larger story.
Courier's win at the Labour Board has laid the groundwork for a new challenge being mounted against an even bigger player in the gig economy, Uber.
You could call it a chain or of victories, and I think that our victory was built on the victories of the past.
A victory in the union vote would represent a validation of Courier's fight.
And I think our victory could be a platform, to use that word in a positive sense, for victories in the future.
And that's exactly what happened. Just as we recorded this episode, Couriers voted in favor of a union. On top of validation, it could have tangible benefits too. Foodora couriers can now tap into protections under Ontario labour laws for workers whose company gets sold to a new buyer. The protections mean FaceDrive may be legally required to hire them and recognize their union. Next time on Hustled.
Who wants to go to court against $1 billion corporation? Just pay me my goddamn money and let's not play games. That's all we really want. Fair pay, the ability to be protected, negotiate for, the things that, people have negotiated for in this country over 100 years ago. I don't like bullies. I don't like to be bullied. And I like things to be fair because life is hard enough as it is.
Hustled was jointly produced by the Toronto Star and Antica Productions. It was written and produced by myself and Antica producer Laura Reguer. Kathleen Goldhar is our story editor and executive producer at Antica. Mitch Stewart is our audio producer. Mixing and sound design by Phil Wilson. And Stuart Cox is president of Antica Productions. Janet Hurley is senior editor at the Toronto Star, and Irene Gentle is editor-in-chief. Hustled is made possible thanks to the ongoing support of the Atkinson Foundation. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe to the Toronto Star's daily podcast, This Matters. Hosts Adrian Chung, Sara Mojtehedzadeh, and Raju Mudhar discuss stories of Canadian cultural, economic, and political importance. You can find it at thestar.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts.